To introduce these two gentlemen who will be speaking with us tonight about the history of the American Legion. Mike Fire was born and raised in Marshfield and has been involved in the American Legion for the past 50 years. He was a former district commander, and he has the distinct recognition as being the only honorary state commander. Dave LaFontaine is a transplant to Marshfield and has served as a former commander of the Legion for 9 years. Both of these men have served this patriotic veterans organization with their time, talents, and leadership. Please welcome Mike and Dave.
I'll start it off with
age before.
age before beauty.
I did not say that.
I did. I want to talk a little bit about organization, and Mike is going to talk a little bit and fill it in about the facilities and programs that they've got. And I thought a lot of people don't know a lot about the history of how the American Legion got formed. And so that's what I'm going to start out with, is the American Legion started really in Europe in March of 1919. And there was a group of about 17 men that were overseas in Paris and met together. And they decided that they needed an organization because the Grand Army of the Republic that they remember as they grew up here in this country did not take care of its veterans real well. And so they needed to form an organization to look out for the veterans. So in March of 1919, they met together in Europe and they set up some what they thought were goals or visions that they had of what type of an organization they wanted. And things that they talked at that time that they wanted to do was they wanted to create a fraternity based on 5 comradeship, a firm comradeship, born of war service and dedicated to a square deal for all veterans, particularly the disabled, their widows, and their orphans. And another ideal they had was the national security for the American, including a universal military training program for the prevention of all future world wars. And the third ideal that they had was a promotion of 100% Americanism and the combating of communism, Nazism, fascism, socialism, and all other foreign isms. So that was their goal in that. And then as they met there, they decided that within a few months that they needed a bigger group, and most of the veterans, or a lot of the veterans, came back to the United States. And a group of them met then in May of 1919, and they were involved with the program that who was one of the founders of the American Legion was Teddy Roosevelt Jr. And he is considered to be the father of the American Legion. And he had in Europe and in Paris, he convened and was one of the foremost people that got together the group. And when they came back here to the U.S., that he was one of them that had the group there that formed this group that met to form an organization. And so they had what did they have planned? Well, they wanted a representative democracy in a federal republic was the plan that was adopted. And they adopted that in May 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th in St. Louis, Missouri. And they approved the principles that were set forth at that time. And those principles I will talk about a little bit here and mention, which is a preamble to our Constitution for the American Legion. And that pretty much has remained unchanged throughout the years. And I will talk a little bit more about that later on. Well, the organization proceeded quite rapidly, and they got people all across the United States involved with it. And so they had a charter convention then occurred in November 10th, 11th, and 12th in Minneapolis. That's where the first convention for the American Legion was held. And the formation of the American Legion was not without opposition. On the first parade of the American Legion on November 11th, 1919, 4 members of the Legion marching in a parade were shot down in cold blood by a group that was called the Industrial Workers of the World, which was a radical group incited by the propaganda of class hatred. So American Legion fought many battles that people don't know about. Well, that convention, then they had to decide about what city are they going to have their headquarters. And the cities that were considered were Detroit, Indianapolis, Kansas City, Minneapolis. Indianapolis was the one that was chosen. Washington, D.C. was also considered. Well, I had mentioned about the ideals that American Legion, again, was the largest organization of war veterans that was ever set. It was born really from the American Expeditionary Forces in France. And it was the first unit that was conceived overseas by fighting men and women.
Can I ask a question? What's the difference between the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars?
Completely different organizations. American Legion allows all of the people that were in the military. At the time, they had to be in the military during a period of wartime. Any military veteran. It has been changed just recently so that any military veteran that has been in since 1941, since Pearl Harbor, is eligible to belong to the American Legion. The VFW is Veterans of Foreign Wars. You have to be in a combat zone overseas to belong to the Veterans of Foreign Wars. The American Legion is the largest veterans organization in the United States. Unfortunately, VFW tries to take credit for a lot. VFW tries to take credit for a lot that the American Legion does, because the American Legion is very successful in the things that they do. Now, I had mentioned about the concepts of the American Legion. What did they have in mind? Well, the first preamble that we say at every meeting was what they thought, and that was, part of it was written while they were overseas, then it was confirmed and rewritten when they got together at the first convention. And if you read your preamble, you'll pretty much understand, if you really take it to heart, what the American Legion stands for. Starts out, for God and country. We associate ourselves together for the following purposes: to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, to maintain law and order, to foster and perpetuate a 100% Americanism, to preserve the memories and incidents of our association in all wars, to inculcate means to teach a sense of individual obligation to the community, the state, and the nation, to combat the autocracy of both the classes and the masses. Means, but the Legion would be fighting against the power held by any one party, one individual. To make right the master of might, to promote peace and goodwill on earth, to safeguard and transmit to posterity the principles of justice, freedom, and democracy, to consecrate and sanctify by our comradeship our devotion to mutual helpfulness. So that was the preamble to the Constitution, and that's what they thought about, those goals that I said, and ideals, and that's how they expressed those goals, by the preamble that we say at the beginning of every meeting of the American Legion.
And that started
It started in France in March
they
of
still-
1919, and we still follow that today.
There was only one change.
One change, and one change to that. Originally, it was written our association in the Great War, which was World War I was the Great War. It's been changed now to say all wars. That's the only change that there's been in that in over 100 years. Well, the post, now a few things that I'll mention about our post, and Mike can get to a little bit more. The first meeting of the American Legion in Marshfield occurred on June 18th, 1919. So it wasn't very long after the first Legion was formed in May and June that membership here started in Marshfield. And the first meeting that was called to order by an E.O. Witt was the name, and nominations for the first chairman was Major Robert Connor. So the Connor family was a member, was in the First World War, and he formed the committee. And they had nominations, and he ran the first meeting. He also became the first commander. But he started with, he said that there would be 3 committees for the American Legion and the Post 54. There would be an organization committee composed of 5 men, a finance committee composed of 3 men, and a welfare committee composed of 3 men. And at that same meeting, they nominated a Captain John Cole, was elected as a chaplain, and a Sergeant Irwin Went was elected as Sergeant at Arms. And so they discussed at that time, at that meeting, with the committee on when they would meet, what their dues would be, and then the organization committee was left with having to make the decision of just what the dues would be, where the meeting place would be, and other things that pertain to the organization. And one of the interesting things that I came across, probably along about 1920, 21, one of the early founders, and there were 15 charter members of the American Legion Post 54 here in Marshfield. And some of them were fairly prominent citizens, some were not, but so they were all veterans. So I found very interesting was one trip, and I'll read that. In the early 1920s, the National Convention was held in Cleveland, Ohio, and one Sunday morning, my wife and I headed for Cleveland with Art Nenes from Marshfield. We left here about 3 a.m. and picked up John Bonehead Cole at Milwaukee. As soon as we were out of Milwaukee, the boys started to cry for beer. I told them to wait until we had a few miles behind us and until we got past the Chicago traffic. When we got past Chicago, I told them to watch for a tavern, which they found. First one was in Indiana. Indiana was closed on Sunday.
So what was their next stop?
That was where they were going.
They were headed to Cleveland.
Cleveland.
So I don't know where the next stop was. He didn't remark on that. But that was written by the early history up until 1964 was written by George Wood. And that's where some of the stuff that he had written in here is which that I'm talking about. And there was a lot of organizational things and programs that started after that. And I'll turn it over to Mike so he can talk with a little bit about that, and I can add some other things about some of the programs that the Legion is involved in and the facilities that the Post started with.
With his talk about the drinking, and there's a couple stories that we can't even tell. we had a very colorful group. If you look through the names of the first people that formed this up, the first club meeting was held in the old Army, and that was on Second Street, right about where Wenzel Park is now. And that was November 5th of 1919. Well, then they went back and forth, and they don't say from 19 to 26, but then they said they met from 1926 to 38 back in the old Army. Then they decided to purchase it's Baxter Richker Funeral Home for their first meeting in June 3rd of 1948. They sold the building on April 6th of 1950. And they moved to the basement of the Connor Building, which is 108 West 4th Street, is the building that they moved off of Central back to build that new building for the Sears. And they were down in that basement till about 1958. Well, you can figure out from 50 to 58 and look at the age of the gentleman, they probably couldn't make the steps anymore. Or they couldn't get out of there after they had their parties. So then they decided that they were going to, on April 10th of 1958, they leased 1.5 acres on South Maple Avenue and was leased from the city for 25 years for $1 a year. The Post planned this to be a Veterans Memorial Park. And the funny thing about this is not looking at this, about what, 10 years, 5, 6 years ago? No more than 10 years ago. We decided to name the building Veterans Memorial Post. And nobody ever realized that it was done back in the 50s. And some of our members got a little distraught that we changed the name from the Legion Hall to Veterans Memorial Hall. And we did that so we could get other veterans groups to join us. Well, it hasn't happened so far. They built their building in April 12th of 1962, and the only one that would be around that I know of right now is Irv Stengel, and he was the commander in that time when he built that building. And he still is, and he's the oldest living post commander from the post. And guess who the next one is? You're looking at it. So between that and then, they're all of them are gone.
And Mike was the first Vietnam era post commander.
That's correct. And through these times, after the 62, they decided that when you go in there now, the bar is where it is, and it used to be the kitchen. And then and when you walk up, there's a past commander's plaque. It's about the size of this table, and the room's about another 6 to 8 feet in, and that was the bar. The kitchen was the biggest, and the bar was the smallest. And one of the talking points about that is if you knew Teddy Treewell and Harold, they bartended in that bar. They didn't have to move very far. And then in 1972, they decided to remodel, so we moved the kitchen where it is now, and they remodeled the kitchen into a bar. In 1980, we decided in our infinite wisdom that we would remodel the building, so we encompass 3 sides of that building. And at that time, there was no hotels, there was no conference centers. And right after we built, everybody moved in and took all the big events away. There was at one time we were unhappy to have had that big a club because it just wasn't working out. Well, then we decided in 17 to add the patio, we remodeled the kitchen, the new floors. So now we're happy we've got that size hall because right now you can do anything we want. If we have something on the patio range, we just move everybody in now. For the winters, we have every Thursday night we have a band down there. We're almost packed, so it's working real well. So the other thing is, we found Sons of the American Legion Squadron, and a membership to join this, you have to be a veteran. It has to be dad, grandpa, or a mother. Now, somebody says, what about mother? Well, we've got a lot of women that are veterans, so you can belong to the Sons of the American under your mother. Some people don't understand that. We've done a lot of things through the history of the American Legion. We have a military banquet. It was first started in April 22nd of 1926. It's held each year on Veterans Day. The meal is Army stew, beans, and condiments. People say, why don't you do a decent meal? I said, well, this is a decent meal if you ever had Army stew. Ours is a lot better than they do back there.
Well, Mike says it's all Air Force stew. That's why it's better than Army stew.
I forgot to bring that up. So does the commander. Yeah, we also had a chance to acquire a lease on the golf course. So we ran the golf course from 1937 to 1940. And it was probably one of the most profitable ventures we ever went in. Why do you think we didn't keep it?
Are you talking about Marshall Country Club?
We held our meeting there and it was our clubhouse.
Really?
We didn't keep it because we couldn't get any help.
What were the years that you had that?
1937 to 1940.
Wow.
And we met out there too. But you couldn't get any help. Well, you would same four people were doing all the work. And at that time it was only a 9-hole golf course. And then we also had a brilliant idea to acquire the fair stand. Well, that worked out pretty well because the first time they had the fair stand is we started having troops that were ending up in the wars, and they decided that they were going to raise funds for Christmas in July for the troops in service, and that worked out real well. And they also had bean feeds. They had the bean feed. They had the smelt feed, and they would send gifts to the GIs in July. That worked out good. We also have an annual bean feed. This was held the first time on February 2nd, 1939, and it was in the Armory, which is now the one that's on by Rims there. And the guys that did that were the old timers like Orville Reed and the old bucks, and they would cook raw beans. They would start like Grandma used to soak them and cook them. Well, that was a great idea. But if you ever got to be lucky enough to clean the pans, they'd be cooked on that thick. And that was for the Boy Scouts. And at that time we used to pack the Armory with Boy Scouts, and they would get speakers like we'd get Packers would come up and sign. It was quite an adventure. But towards the end, we still have it, but it's down to the Legion, and I don't know how many. We maybe get 20 or 25 that show up, but we still do it. Then the next thing is flags for Memorial Day. I never had much to do with this. One day, Henry Fellhofer, about 1985 or 86, came up to me with a metal box, and he says, "Mike, this is all yours." And I said, "What is that?" He says, "I've been putting flags on graves for about the last 30 years, and I'm just getting too old. It's all yours." That was an interesting process.
Are you still doing it?
Yep.
Sure.
Right now, we do 2,200 graves in Marshfield, and we have another 250 outside of Marshfield.
2,000
2020.
in Marshfield?
Yep.
Oh, Lord.
You got 20 maps. And now we're at the point where our veterans are getting too old to walk the cemetery, but we're lucky enough to get Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts groups. And we also got the grad school now. They come on the day after Veterans Day and Memorial Day, and they take them down for us. So that otherwise we'd never be able to do it. And we have got Gary and his wife, and they go out and do the outline. The toughest one is Nasonville. It's called Boot Hill. You should have a leg about 6 inches shorter or more because it's on a hill like this. And I'd be happy to give this up, but the maps are on a computer, so that it doesn't take long. We make new maps every year. I kept the old maps, and they're on cardboard, but they've been scribbled on, changed, moved, and they're hard to read, but I didn't throw them away. Then we went into the Honor Walk project program in about 2018. Paul Rogers came back from Florida and said, "I got a great thing we should do. We should put banners on Main Street." We've done that for 6 years. We've put 360 banners on Main Street, and Kathy Banks tells me she's got 400 more that she puts out in the surrounding area, so it's been really lucrative. In little towns like Roosevelt, Pittsfield, Rudolph, they all have flags. And I'm losing my voice. Anyway, going on to a couple other ones. Memorials. The city of the American Legion and the city and the Veterans Council have been really fortunate to want to, preserve history. So we put the Red Arrow Park down by City Hall. Flanders Field Cemetery, that was between us and the Rotary back in the 20s. Veterans Parkway murals, we put those up about the time, I would say that was in about the mid-90s. We put a tank down in the Legion. That I wish was someplace else. It's so big that it blew. But if you want to find the final Legion, just tell them, go to the battle tank. You can find us. We put the Covert Chopper up. That's an interesting story. We decided we wanted to put a chopper in the park by the old city hall. And the principal from Emmanuel Lutheran came to this council meeting and stood up and said, we don't want any weapons of war in any of our parks. And he said, and I got up and he said, and it's a history of destruction and war. And I got up and I said, well, you know, I'm also a weapon of destruction. I loaded weapons in the Air Force, but you don't see me walking around doing anything. We put it up. That's been one of our better deals. And then we talked the city into giving us and deeding us the Field of Honor. We have got that one section that goes from street to street, so we've got enough graves up there for a long time. And there was no battle there either. Also, we sponsor the American Legion Blue Devil Baseball. We sponsor Boy States, which Badger Boy State, which teaches government and we send 8 boys every year. I've been lucky enough to serve on the board down there for 25 years. So I'm on the board for Badger Boys. I just can't give up anything. I just gotta keep in it. And we acquired Cabin 18, that is at Camp America Legion, which is a rehab facility on Gower Lake and Lake Tomahawk in the mid 90s. We maintained this cabin until September of 2022. Well, then we proceeded to erect a new family cabin, number 12. This is a total handicap cabin, has 2 handicap bathrooms, and is a year-round cabin facility. And it used to be to go camp, you had to have a doctor's permission to go there for rehab. Now all you have to do is be a veteran, and if you want to take your family up there for a week, you can. And the veteran goes, you eat 3 meals a day for 5 days, and it doesn't cost you anything to go.
And where's that at?
Camp Lake Tomahawk on Gower Lake.
That's east of Hazelhurst.
Yep.
About 5 miles, 5.5 miles
I know where it is.
up there in County Trunk E.
And we had talked about rehabbing 18, which was a log structured, buried, the elements were held up by a big stump.
Yeah.
We took Bill Heiding and we took up 2 contractors and an engineer, and they worked it out. They said, it doesn't pay to rehab this cabin because it wasn't handicapped. So we decided to build a new one. Now we put this up, we put up a Wisconsin home, and it's a beautiful cabin.
It's a shining example for everybody else.
Do military families go there and stay then in this cabin? Or?
For 5 days they can.
So if you want to take a break, I got a few things. I'm going to add a few tidbits a little bit in it about the American Legion and the post here. During World War II, there was, and I'll read pretty much about what George wrote. During World War II, there were a great many duties turned over to the American Legion. The Federal Bureau of Investigation sent their men to Marshfield repeatedly. Usually they were checking some individuals on whom they had a report as to suspicious activities, or at least talking too much. You know, loose lips sink ships during World War II. Well, FBI came here to Marshfield. They enlisted the support of the American Legion to investigate those people that had the loose lips. And there was more to it than that. Marshfield, that not very many people know, had a number of German POWs here in Germany, here in Marshfield, working at the cannery.
Yep.
There were about 5 or 6. There were others that came here to Marshfield and went out to surrounding towns, to canning companies, and supplemented the workforce. Generally, POWs came to Wisconsin Rapids, and there was a group camp that was down there at the airport in Wisconsin Rapids. And then they would come out, and some of them that would come out to the other towns, and here there was a group that stayed here. The German prisoners had quite a bit of freedom through the community. The local people were told not to talk to them, but it was not unusual for a German prisoner to be walking uptown or something, because they were given a lot of freedom, and they were all pretty safe type people to be around here. when you look at the book that's called, I believe it's Stalag 19, that was written about the POWs in Wisconsin, many of the POWs that were here housed in Wisconsin after the war came back to Wisconsin. Well, a lot of them that had families around the Milwaukee area and throughout the state, because Wisconsin had a lot of German heritage. So the POWs were probably, they met with, there was a lot of brothers, sisters that lived here in the state of Wisconsin that were soldiers in the German army. And there was also, they wanted to know about, the FBI wanted to know about certain people here for key spots in our government to make sure that the American Legion would approve that they were safe and were good U.S. citizens before they were put into some higher positions. So the American Legion had quite a bit of influence in the community. Also, another thing is the American Legion was instrumental in putting up an honor roll of World War II men. They had 1,500 men from the area that was put up by the city hall, big placard.
Where's it now?
I don't know, we got pictures of it. Like, I can't find it. My dad was standing there pointing where his name was on it, but I don't know what happened to it. I suppose they took it down, but nobody preserved it. Back in those days, history wasn't any big deal. That's its problem. They didn't really feel history was that important. But now we find out we're missing a lot of things that we shouldn't have.
Also in 1943, the Legionnaires had a crew that were selling, were trying to raise money, and they were selling stuff at the fair and other activities, which is the proceeds were spent for cigarettes were sent to soldiers overseas. Now we probably wouldn't go over too good of that. So that things about what the Legion were involved in. Mike can get some more of this.
I got out of this. Well, first I'll tell you how I got into the service. I went down when we were in high school. Yeah, we always went down for like in the physical, see what kind of shape we were in. And as I was walking back, I see there's a guy out, and I got them all lined up, and he's going 1, 2, 3. I said, "What is he doing?" And the guy says, "Oh, they were draftees, and they went Army, Navy, Marines, and that's where you ended up. Just the luck of the draw." And I thought, I ain't gonna do that. So when I walked by the Air Force, I said, "What are they doing?" And he explained that, and I said, "How can I stop me from good? I'd like to go in the Air Force." He says, "Well, I was a senior," and I said, I'd like to do something." He said, "Well, pre-enlist." So I filled out the paperwork and gave me a number, and he said, "When your number comes up, give me a call." So I went to school, or went back over to Wausau to tech school, and I was going, I think it's my first year, and I went quite done, and my buddy calls, "Our numbers are up." So I called the Air Force, and they said, "Sign me up." He says, "Well, you be in Milwaukee Monday, we'll put you in the Air Force." About 3, 4 weeks later, there's a knock on the door. My mother, the sheriff's there, and there's an officer from the Army. Said, "Is Michael here?" My mother started laughing. And then the officer says, "This isn't funny, ma'am." She says, "Yes, it is." "Well, explain why it's so funny." "Well," she says, "Michael's in the Air Force for about 3 weeks." Chuck Hennis, he was in Vietnam, and they sent him his draft number.
My brother is Norman Tremelli, Mystery Marshal Spencer, and I and my sister took him down to Milwaukee, and he had to go to this business, and the next morning, he went to this office or whatever, and he was gone. He was on his way to California in Camp Pendleton, I think, out in California or whatever, and then of course he was in Vietnam and so on and so forth, but, things were different then.
And then when I got out of the service, I got out about, I think it was June, and I was sitting on the front porch, and Ron Newman came over and he says, "Well, what are you doing back?" I said, "Oh, I'm out." And he said, "Well, come on, I've got a job for you." So he took me down to the fair stand, and he and his dad were painting the fair stand at that time. And he says, "Well, I'll help you." And he said, "Well, good, you can help me work that year." So I worked the fair stand before I was a Legionnaire. And I should have backed away from that one. But I've been accused of a lot of things. Paul Rogers accused me because I signed him up. Jim Rigel says, "You're the reason I did what I did." And I said, "I did not force you to be state commander. That was your job." And getting into that one, I like to make a notion that members of Post 54 who served in the district, department, and national, we had a John H. Cross that was the district commander in 1919, which is something else, because they had just formed the district. Charlie Pores was the district commander in 1920. A.S. Rhodes was the district commander in 1921. So we were pretty active in those early days because it was a young group. Bill Kenny, he was district commander in 39, department commander in 44, alternate NEC in 46, 47, and NEC man in 1948 and 1949. Father Dillenberg was the department chaplain in 1959. Bob Frauchi was district commander in 69, 70, and department vice commander in 71. John Crawford
Yeah.
was the judge advocate in 75. Leo Nicolai was district commander in 78, department vice commander in 79. You can see we were very active in the not so much now as we were then. I was district commander in 85, 86, department vice commander in 97, ran for department commander in 1988, got beat by a gentleman, and 25 years later I found out he wasn't eligible for the Legion. That's how I became, in just the last year and a half, they made me an honorary department commander. I spent all that time and didn't do anything for it. My son was the Sons of the American Legion detachment commander. I would have been commander and he would have been commander at the same time. And Kathy Gorse was judge advocate 90 and 91, and department commander, vice commander in the following year. So we've had a lot of Legionnaires in Wisconsin, Marshfield, that were very active in the Legion. And I got a cute story to tell. When Father Dillenberg, he died in the confessional.
Right.
And one of the guys called the department for it was Bob Wilkie, and he told him Father died in the confessional, and he says, "Who was in there, Bob Frauchi or Jim Olson?" You had to know those two. You gotta have a little. We always had a lot of humor.
Yeah, I went through this on our list of commanders. In the 104 years of Post 54, there were 86 different men that served in the position of commander. And some of these names there were fairly prominent citizens. I think here in Marshfield, the first one, Robert Connor, was Fred Reiner, William Kennedy, Lloyd Felker. They were commanders in the 20s. And in the 30s, you had Charles Brame and Alvin Hansen and Kenneth Pucker that were commanders. In the 40s was a Clifford Billings, Charles Poors, and this George Wood, Glenn Tinkham. And Glenn Tinkham was the head of the Badger Boy State when I went to Badger Boy State in 1955. And in 48, there was Howard Quirk.
Yeah, he's a loser.
And then there were others that in the 60s, Dave Kepke, who was a former mayor. And Mike mentioned Irv Stangl, he was a commander in 63. Ted Trewiler was a commander. Robert Frauchi was a commander. Harold Trewiler was a commander in the 60s. Leo Nicolai was in the 70s. And Vern Ader, 75, Doug O'Donnell. And then 78, Mike Fire, the first Vietnam veteran, was a commander. In the 80s, there was Gerald Michelson and Gary Cummings. Gary Cummings was a commander in 84. In the 90s, Mike Fire was commander again, Jim Rigel. And then the first woman commander was Patricia Jude. And then Jim Rigel was, for 3 years, was a commander. And then started probably in the 90s where people became commander for multiple years.
9 years he was commander.
Who was that? Yeah.
We finally got somebody, really, but we got a younger one, and she's better looking.
A lot better, yeah. And she relates a lot better to the younger crowd too. But that's just some of the commanders in there. Other things that the Legion has been involved in that people don't understand. You know, the American Legion was the founder of the American Heart Association. One of the other things, the GI Bill was written by a Legionnaire.
A state commander, or national commander, and he wrote it on a napkin. And they still have it in Indianapolis. I got an idea where they were sitting, of course, the bar comes up all the time. And he went back to his room and wrote it on napkins. He didn't have any papers, so he wrote it on napkins. And one thing we can say is with pride that our mission for the American Legion Post 54 was forever. The 104 years has always been service to the veteran, their families, and dedicated to the youth of our country. And we still have got that as our goal. And one of our, just to put a little plug in, the Elks are very instrumental. Their mission is veterans also.
Mhm.
So they do a lot with us. So.
They provided money for us for that cabin too. Provided thousands of dollars for us.
Yeah, and I gotta ask you a question. Your caps at 54 on what is the post?
It's post 54.
Oh, post 54.
Yeah, post 54.
So your main fundraiser, the food stand at the fair, or is that?
It has been for many years, was the main fundraiser that carried us through from year to year was the fair, the state fair. But it's, I guess probably in the last 6-7 years, the fair has cut back on the amount of money that we can make because they raised the fees, and the vendors, all of the vendors, we're not alone, but all of the vendors are finding it very difficult to make money at the fair anymore.
But that's the history of fairs, though. We're doing better now that we've remodeled our stand.
One of the other things I want to mention to you as a little tidbit of information, the American Legion Post 54 gave $7 to the women to form a women's auxiliary in 1924. $7. That's all the women's auxiliary got for. We were very generous at $7.
Is that when they started?
Yes.
Yeah. But we have the history of, if you go through the history, and it'll say, well, we don't have any money, they're always short. We always gave most of our profit away to different groups. We were all very active in the community. Yeah, we gave it to the community. We never kept it for ourselves. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But now we're in better shape where we can start giving back to the community also, because our goal is to keep going. And when we found out that the KCs were gone, the VFW lost their building,
Right.
and we decided, and Paul Rogers was sitting, I like when he sits in Florida and gets up with cockamamie ideas, and he's good for it. He calls us every time with a new idea, and he decided that this wasn't going to happen, and he was going to rebuild the post, and he and Tom Merkel stepped up and helped us to remodel them. Now it's like a brand new building.
Wonderful.
And people just don't realize it when they come. They haven't been there for a few years. They're just shocked at what the building looks like. So we are probably set for a long time. We're going to keep it. Works real well, and it's become a community place, not just a Legion.
It's not like a magnet for,
Yeah. I always call it's the Airway bar that's showing.
Yeah.
If you look around and never went to Airway, is that not
Spikes.
true? Well, Spikes too, but it's the Airway bar. That's the crew that comes down.
I was out at the last thing they had out. They had this band that came out to senior high a week ago, and the drummer used to drum at the Airway bar.
oh jeez.
in Marshfield, and I don't know, he's with this fancy band now. I don't know where they're from, Milwaukee, but they put on a good show. But anyway, he started out the Airway bar.
And we've been very, very active through the years, for 104 years. Our problem is we never blow our,
Don't blow your
blow
whistle.
our own whistle. No, we don't. But now people are realizing that we do a lot. And we with the money we get for the banners, we put it back in the community and we give. It's good to have money now. Then
And people in Marshfield know that they can go to the American Legion and have a good time.
Yep.
And see people they know and get good food and good drinks and so on and so forth.
never have a fight.
And you've built up the reputation of the American
Yep.
Legion.
Are there any other questions that we can answer?
Well, I can mention one of the things, when researching the history, one of the things that comes up time after time after time is from what George wrote, that over the years, when he wrote this history in 1964, is he says the American Legion post-54 never was in a strong always had financial problems because they gave all their money away to the vets. They raised money, they had money, they gave it away for community things. And that's true today.
And I've got 3 hats up here. This one is a national hat. The national officers wear red, the state officers wear white, and the district officers wear blue here and white on top. And then this is a post hat. And this is my son was the commander of the SAL for the state. That's the color for that hat. So we bought these hats. Talking about hats, when we go to Washington, D.C. or Madison, and for whatever we want to do, we want to talk to them. They say, here come those guys in those funny hats. And they know we're not there to say hi. And they treat us quite well. Lately, we've been doing real well at the VA because the American Legion national-wise has adopted the new PACAC program for Agent Orange and burn pits. And they're really watching and they're helping a lot of veterans. Last year, they procured about $18 billion for the veterans, just in those 3. They opened up the package for the veterans in like Thailand, blue water sailors, and burn pits, and they are really looking into some of these guys that they applied for disability, and they for some reason they didn't get it. One guy that our national commander is from a native of Merrill, Wisconsin right now, and he's a minister in Horicon, and he started just to push on this, and one guy was trying to get something, and he went to the national CVSO and wanted some help. He was getting 10%, and they found out he was 100% disabled, and they went back to when he first got his 10%. They wrote him a check for $460,000
Wow.
back pay. But not to jeopardize my faith in people, the VA has been dragging their feet because they figure us guys that could have Agent Orange won't live long enough to collect. But they finally opened that up, and the Legion's a big push for that. Some guys are getting something they deserve.
If it wasn't for the Legion, a lot of those benefits that the veterans get today, they wouldn't be, because from what I've read and looked at it is the government always waits until the veterans that are disabled, injured, wait till they die off, and then they'll come back and say, well, now we'll help them out. The Legion is constantly from a national level pressuring Congress to take care of its veterans. And that was the reason that I started out with, is why the American Legion was initially formed, was because the Civil War veterans were not treated very well, and the veterans up until World War I. And that group that was in Paris at the time realized that their benefits for all of those U.S. soldiers that were gassed and disabled and injured weren't going to get treated by the government unless somebody stood up for them. And that group that stood up for them, that formed, that's why the American Legion was formed, and that's what they have done from its entire history.
Are you working with the legislature or?
But that's when they call us those good silly hats. For the last 10 years, they finally straightened out the VA. For a while, the VA didn't have a very good record. But now the VA hospitals are top notch. They get the best of the best. Doctors are really wanting to work with them because they know that they're going to get the support that
And
they're
their
going to need.
clinics
Yeah.
My brother Rick Merkel's youngest daughter is a lobbyist for the VA out in DC. And my dad, Carl Merkel, got the Legion Award in 1937
Wow.
with 18.
And my son works at the VA in Zablocki down in Milwaukee. And he said they can't believe how busy they are, and they keep adding on to that clinic in the hospital. That's state of the art down there now, which is good for us. Not all states are that fortunate. Some of them still got buildings they're building they haven't finished yet. But they're getting them.
You reminded me that people don't realize how much the American Legion has a member down in Milwaukee at Zablocki. He pushes out over $150 million worth of benefits every year for veterans in Wisconsin.
So we're in good shape.
If it wasn't for the American Legion, it wouldn't happen.
Well, excuse me, one of my daughters works in the VA in Albany, New York, as a music therapist.
My son runs the respiratory therapy in Zablocki, and he's got an associate's degree in that, but he got it up here at Midstate. He runs the department, and he's got a full bird colonel and lieutenant colonel come into his office, and he's got it on his desk, Staff Sergeant Sean Fire, and they salute him. Doesn't happen that too many colonels salute a sergeant. He runs a real good department. Loves you. Any questions? Anybody else?
Mike, you had mentioned Henry Fellhofer before. You said he took care of the flags on the cemetery for 30 years
By himself.
by himself. Who's all taken care of it besides you since then?
Just we set it up, and we have 20 maps that come out every year, and then we put them out on that Saturday, and they come up, and the scouts and the parents, and we get quite a few people that come
So
up.
he put out all the flags physically himself.
But at that time, he probably had probably 1,000 maybe.
It says in my history, it said the first time that they put them out, he had 648 flags.
Who was that again?
Henry fell off,
Oh,
Yeah.
and then he took them down himself too.
So, but now, okay, so you're
Now
trying to
I organize this on a Saturday. They come up about 10 o'clock, and we can put flags out in about an hour and a half with enough people.
Okay.
And then on the Tuesday after we take them down, those kids come are just like little bees. They start out on them, and they take them down in about an hour.
Oh, wow.
And we get to the point where we tried that one year. It took us forever. We didn't have any help. If we ever get to the point where we can't, they won't put them out. We're not going to quit it, but they're going to just have to have somebody pick up their flag and take it up there. But we get more and more people are coming out to help.
Yeah, the cemetery looks very nice on Veterans Day,
Yes.
not Veterans Day, Memorial Day.
To answer your question a little bit more, Don, is that I help Mike with him is that Mike has got the maps, he takes care of the maps. People that come up and he breaks them down into different groups. It could be anywhere from 2 to 5, 6, 7 people. And then he gives them a map. And I hand them out the flags, and they take them out by the maps that they get from Mike. And then they go out there and
How many volunteers, are involved in this?
I would,
50?
it could be 50 with the kids.
Oh, wonderful. That's wonderful that they're involved.
Well, it teaches them a different project than.
Don't the schools now have a program where they have to do so much volunteer work?
Probably.
So that would be a place too for,
Well, this is right on the end of the school year,
School
so
year.
they got enough to
Okay,
do.
yeah,
They love to get them out in that fresh air, and get them tired so they go back and eat and take a nap.
One
And-
more quick question, and I'm sitting here trying to remember the names. The post has the names of soldiers who were killed in service.
Oh, I can tell you that.
Yeah,
we can
What-
tell you
what are the
a little
names?
bit about them too.
I got another story before he does that. I was talking to Fred Sadowska,
yeah.
and he got a call recently from the DOD, the Department of Defense. They want to take his DNA. Apparently, they may have found the ship that Ivan had gone down in. and they're trying to see if they have any of his remains. That would be cool if they bring him
Wow.
back and bury him. He's the only one that was a mission action.
Only one.
That our first, the post was first named after William Lesseyoung, and he was born in Marshfield on August 28th, 1889, was killed at Chateau Thierry in France, August 2nd, 1918. He was the son of Mr. and Mrs. John Lesseyoung, Marshfield. He attended St. John's Parochial School in Marshfield and worked as a carpenter until he joined Company A, 2nd Wisconsin Infantry, for service on the Mexican border in 1916. When World War I began, he remained with the company, which became Company A, 127th Infantry, 32nd Division. He served with that company in the United States and France until his death. His friends said he was always very popular because of his unfailing good humor, although the tricks he played on his friends occasionally led to loud talk. He was best known by his friends as Weary. His body was brought to Marshfield after the war, and he was buried in Flanders Field. Ivan Sadowska, you want to read that one?
Sure. Ivan Sadowska was born in Marshfield, Wisconsin, November 29th, 1919, and died November 8th, 1942. He was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Gus Sadowska of Marshfield, Wisconsin. He attended high school in Marshfield and Wisconsin Rapids, and at the time of his entry into the service, October 29th, 1941, he was employed by the A.H. Wine and Rental Company in Marshfield. Private Sadowski was trained as a tank operator in an armored force unit at Fort Knox, Kentucky for 6 months, and then spent some time in New Jersey before going to Northern Ireland on May of 1942. He was aboard a vessel which was sunk in action incident to the landing of forces on the northern coast of Africa, and he was lost in the operation. So apparently that must have surfaced somewhere, because they've got some remains of these. That would be really neat.
My son is the commander of the American Legion in Alaska. And they always have a big fundraiser, and I actually donated one of my antique trunks that I restored, and the money from this they give to share or someone in need or whatever. And it was, I don't know if you heard this, but I'll make it brief. There was a big bonfire for homecoming there, and someone threw bullets in there, and it landed, and several people were injured, and so all of the money that they took in from this went to those families to help pay their hospital bills.
I got one thing to add about flags before I forget it.
Okay.
When I'm in my first year on the county board, I went to the finance, and the county furnishes flags for all of our veterans, and they decided to cut the funding on it. And I said, you can't do that. And Trent Miner at that time was the chairman of the finance committee. He says, well, if you're not happy, bring it to the full county board. So I put it on. I got up and I said, I want that funding back in the budget. And he said, you can't have it. And I said, wait a minute. I said, look around here. I said, look what you've got. If it wouldn't be for these veterans that you're putting their dear flags on for, you'd either be talking German or Japanese. And he says, well, go for the vote. And the only one that voted against it was some old fart that I can't remember. And unanimous, 38, we had 38 votes. And they'll never go after my flags again, because I'll be packing on it. Well, I said, that was a fight. He said, you'll never get it. I said, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Another veteran that's recognized by the post is Vernon Kessler. Vernon Kessler was born in Colby, Wisconsin, October 29th, 1928, and moved to Marshfield with his parents the following year. He attended Sacred Heart Parochial School and graduated from Marshfield Senior High in 1946. Kessler entered the Army September 28th, 1946, and after basic training at Camp Lee, Virginia, he spent 1.5 years on occupation duty in Japan. He was discharged as a sergeant May 14th, 1948. That fall, he enrolled at St. Norbert College and was a junior when the Army reservist. He was recalled to duty September 22nd, 1950. He arrived in Yokohama November 30th and was in Korea the following day. He was charged with aiding in the evacuation of GIs as assistant commander of a packet. At one time, he had been 45 miles north of the 39th parallel. Most of his time in Korea was spent in constant rear guard actions. He died in action on January 26, 1951, was 22 years old. And says he was the first American man to die in the Korean conflict. Bernal Martin was born in Marshfield March 9th, 1945, and was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Wilford Martin of Marshfield. He attended Sacred Heart Parochial School and graduated from Marshfield Senior High in 1963. He then enlisted in the Marine Corps on July 18, 1963. He received his basic training at Camp Pendleton, California. He served with the 19th Fleet Marine Force in Da Nang area from July 18th to November 1st, 1964. The Marine was then sent to Okinawa and returned to the continental United States in March 1965. While in Vietnam, his original tour of duty, Martin received the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal, and the Vietnamese Citation. At Da Nang, he and his fellow Marines aided in guarding the airstrip. PFC Martin began his second tour of duty July 1st, 1966. He lost his life as a result of fragmentation wounds sustained in action in Quat Trang Province, South Vietnam, on August 8, 1966. He was 21 years old at the time and is buried at the Gate of Heaven Cemetery. He was the first local man to die in the Vietnamese War. Vietnam War. Yeah.
I had
Something like that. Being mature.
haven't been in. I had duty in Thailand, and they used to bring all of they'd fly the deceased in on a chopper with a body bag. And I made up my mind that we would never lose another person from Marshfield when I got in here. Well, that didn't happen. So then this one tore me up. Joseph J. Altman was born in Marshfield on December 15, 1985. He was the son of John and Jan Altman of Marshfield. He attended Marshfield area Catholic schools and graduated from Columbus High School in 2003. He attended UW Marshfield Wood and UW Marathon County after active duty in the Army in April 2005. He attended basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, graduated in July of 2005. He trained as a combat medic at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. Graduated in November 2005. Altman completed further medical training in October 2010 when he awarded the Expert Field Medic Badge. This was a multi-duty training and testing course that culminated in a 12-mile run which needed to be completed in under 3 hours. Of the 160 participants that started, only 12 completed and one awarded the badge. He attained the rank of Army Staff Sergeant and served as a medic with the 2nd Battalion, 27th Armored, 3rd Brigadier Combat Team, 25th Infantry Division based in Hawaii. He recently had re-enlisted and was known in his Army buddies as Doc. He was initially assigned to duty at Kunar Province, Afghanistan in April 2011. He had served 2 previous tours in Iraq. He was due to complete his tour of duty in February or March of 2012. Joe Doc Altman died of injuries suffered during an insurgent attack on December 25, 2011. He was buried in Gate of Heaven Cemetery, and he was 27 years old. He volunteered to go that night out for a buddy, and that's what he got.
I remember that when he died, there was a note.
On Christmas.
I remember that.
This goes to show. And he would have probably worked for the fire department here as a paramedic because he was trained well. But it's the way it goes. Never going to get over that. But, the world is not fair.
Now,
Anything else?
these individuals were the first ones killed from Marshfield in each of the conflicts.
Out of curiosity then, you said that Lessa Wong died August 18th? Or August something, and Willard Purdy died in July of 1918.
He died August 2nd, 1918.
Yeah, and Willard Purdy died in July of 1918. So why would they have used or given Leslie Long the honor there?
Don't have an answer.
Okay.
They were selected at that time, they were selected by their peers, the people that were here, and then it became a tradition that it would be the first
Okay.
one. It may not have been a tradition at the time of the First World War when they were selected the first people for the post names. And it might have been the first one that they had the word on that had,
Yeah, if they were
It was
notified
dying.
first.
And it could have been that they named Purdy the school, and they weren't gonna put two names
at
on
the same
two
time,
buildings.
yeah.
That's probably was the thinking, I would think.
And Leslie Long was born here. I don't know that Purdy was born here.
Either do I.
And it didn't hit me, or I never thought about that until you mentioned the date. So
and he was also very popular among his friends. And I'm sure with the rest of the people that from Marshfield area that went over there with him on that, and I'm sure they lobbied for him to be the first one supposed to be named after them.
yeah, and then like with what Mike said about because of the school,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
It
think
makes
that's
a lot of
probably why,
sense.
yeah.
yeah.
But sometimes you went to the cemetery and you had it for.
Well, unless there's any other questions, I don't know anything much more here.
Was
Did
very
you
nice.
learn anything?
Yes.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Yes, thank you. There was quite a few things I learned, didn't know about the American Heart Association especially. I want to thank you guys for your presentation. I want to thank you for your service to our country too.
You're welcome.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, I always said, I fought, still had to go.
So Spoken History will be again in February. If you want to attend again, it will be on Valentine's night. So bring your sweetheart.
Wednesday.
Yeah. It'll be Don Schnitzler as our speaker, and he'll be talking about some couples in Marshfield.
Power couples
Power
from the
couples,
past. But
yes.
I hope people will come and talk about people that they knew that were important, where both the husband and wife were important to Marshfield history. So,
Yeah, we were gonna do this presentation at the fair that year, we never,
and I
we
told
never
that's
got
why.
anybody to come in, we sat on.
And I was sitting there waiting for you.
Nice job, guys. I got a lot.
Yes.
Very good. And we recorded this, so hopefully now people will see it. We'll put it